Sheriff Ozzie Kneovich talks with community leaders about issues in the public safety arena, sponsored by River Ridge Hardware.
This is Sheriff Ozzie Kneovich with the Sheriff's Report. Today we're going to have a conversation with a mother that lost a son to fentanyl. This is a conversation that is happening across the United States. This is a conversation that I've had for the last nearly 9 years dealing with the opioid issues facing our nation. Fentanyl is an insidious drug, a drug that is being pushed across our southern border in huge quantities. The precursors come from China, and still our government doesn't seem to recognize that our nation is being flooded with this poison by foreign nations. We have to find a way to stop the influx of fentanyl across our borders and into the hands of our children. If we go to the first slide, this slide kind of sums up one of the things that my guest, the mother of the individual that lost their life, my guest, Molly Cain, when I was reading materials that she had sent for me to look at prior to doing this podcast, that sentiment is one that really struck me because it is so true. All it takes is one time, and your life is over. Today we're going to talk with Molly Cain about her son Carson, and if we could bring up that second slide. And this is Carson's story. And the materials I read, Molly, about Carson were really touching. A very unique, strong young man. I can, at points, really relate to him because I have dyslexia too. I know what it's like to be a young kid in school trying to overcome those type of challenges. And, the story that was related about his struggle with that and how he did not let that determine where he went in life was really touching. So why don't you give the audience a snapshot of Carson? Who was Carson?
I would love to, and I'd like to thank you for having me today and letting me speak about this. Carson was my beloved 23-year-old son, and I'd like to read a few things, if I could, about Carson. Carson Cain was an Colbert Elementary, Mountainside Junior High, Mount Spokane alumni, and a Gonzaga University student. Throughout Carson's life, he exemplified and was recognized for his kindness, compassion, perseverance, and acceptance of others. Carson had a beautiful soul. He was wise beyond his years, and his heart was true. He loved deeply, cared beyond what words can express, and lent a helping hand before asked. He persevered in the face of adversity. When Carson was 6 years old, he was diagnosed with dyslexia. At 7, he was diagnosed with a familial tremor that progressively worsened. And at 10 years old, his father, Mark, passed away from cancer, and Carson took on more responsibility within our family without being prompted or asked. During this time, he helped to maintain our family home and property to perfection. Carson graduated from Mount Spokane High School with both his high school diploma and his AA degree and went on to Gonzaga University. When Carson was 22, he was diagnosed with cancer. Carson was a genuine and compassionate person and wanted to better the world around him. He'd lend a hand or an understanding ear to those in need and did not expect anything in return. During his college years, Carson would plow snow in the early morning hours and, without request or compensation, would stop at the parking lot of a local cancer center to clear the lot. When asked why he made that stop, Carson replied, "The patients going for treatment have enough challenges. They don't need one more to navigate." This action embodied Carson's compassionate and devoted spirit. Carson had a strong work ethic. He understood the value of hard work. He once wrote, "I've worked full-time positions, one in a manual labor setting followed by a managerial position in a retail atmosphere. Each offered their own rewarding life lessons. Both taught me what a persistent work schedule is. With both jobs, I averaged almost 60-hour work weeks. Manual labor taught me how to appreciate the consistency in my own work. The slow chip in the sculpting of a larger project was rewarding to see my part in the finished product. Being in a managerial retail position taught me to appreciate the highly repetitive work schedule, the competitive nature of business, solidified the importance of a solid work ethic, and, at times, the importance of showing grace to others when circumstances out of their control hindered their job performance. I can say neither taught me how to do my chemistry homework, but did further instill within me the drive and the value in education. While working alongside people 3 times my own age in both atmospheres, I've realized my brain is metaphorically the strongest and most durable muscle that I possess." Carson was easy to love and made friends naturally. His infectious smile and quick wit were warming and joyful, and he entertained his family and friends with his lovable charm. He could often be found creating something, whether building, renovating, making music, and he loved to exercise. It didn't matter if he was working out in a gym or busting out enviable dance moves. He was devoted to his childhood buddies and his Gonzaga University brothers alike. Those who gained his friendship can attest that he was fiercely loyal, kind, and tender. He had a wonderful, empathetic ability to walk in other people's shoes and be available to someone who needed a friend. Carson loved his family beyond measure and was our light and joy. Carson Fisher Cain will be remembered for his strength, his compassion, humility, and kindness. He is deeply missed, profoundly. He was my son.
You know, one of the things when we were talking about Carson before we went on the air here that really struck me was he made a promise to his dad.
He did.
And you told me about that promise, and that promise really came to light in that he did everything he said he was going to do for his dad before his dad passed away. I would like you to talk just a little bit about that, because you're getting ready to sell your family home up in the Colbert area and move, and Carson related to you. You know, it was a little hard for him to leave that home because he grew up there, and
Sure.
he made a promise. So talk a little bit about that.
So Carson was 10 when we lost his dad to brain cancer, and Carson had taken his dad out in a wheelchair. My husband had lost mobility, and Carson was pushing him around. Well, forward to 2015, when we were selling our family home, and Carson was attending Gonzaga University. Actually, excuse me, it was 2017. Carson was attending Gonzaga University, and he had come home, and he didn't express at the time, he was holding it in, how difficult it was to lose. You know, we were saying goodbye to our home. We weren't losing it, we were selling it. It was too much for me to maintain, and the property taxes were astronomical. So I conveyed to Carson, you have to grieve. This is a grieving thing. We've had a lot of memories here. We've had a lot of wonderful, happy times. This was your childhood home. We had a lot of sad times. We lost his dad there, and we had a big barn that my parents lived in an apartment off of, and my dad passed away there. So, you know, in a 10-month period, Carson lost 2 important male role figures in his life, my father and his father, and Carson's dad. And I remember it clearly. We were sitting in his Toyota truck, and he broke down and he wept. And he said, I made a promise to my dad when I was pushing him in the wheelchair that day that I would take care of this place. I would take care of you. I would take care of Colton. My husband never would have asked Carson that. That just speaks to who Carson was at the core. He was the person who watched out for others.
As we mentioned last February or last November, you found Carson,
Did.
and why don't you talk a little bit about that day and that experience?
Sure. So it was the day after Thanksgiving, November 27th, 2020. Carson had come to my home for Thanksgiving dinner, and he brought a friend because his friend didn't have a place to go. And he said, "Mom, can I bring my neighbor?" Carson lived down in the GU district, and his neighbor was a woman in her 70s who wasn't able to be around her family, and he was concerned that he didn't want her to be by herself. And the two had befriended one another. My concern was because COVID at the time, I wanted to make sure that everyone was safe. So I had said to Carson, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea, but let's make her a plate. And he said, great, I want to take it to her. Before he came, he took flowers to her, he took flowers to my mother, and he brought me flowers. We had a nice meal. Carson was absolutely exhausted. He wasn't sleeping. You know, he had anxiety, losing his father to cancer at 10 and then being diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, appendix cancer. There are only 1,000 cases in the United States a year. Weighed heavily on his mind, and he had some anxiety over that. He left and hugged me goodbye. I remember that hug so clearly. Told me he loved me and thanked me. At 9 o'clock that night, or 9:15, he sent me a text. Carson referred to me as babe. He sent me a text and said, "Thank you for dinner, babe. It was perfect. I'm so thankful for you. So thankful to have you as my mom and all you do for me. You are my angel." Well, the next morning, I texted him and he didn't respond. I called later and he didn't respond. And I thought, that's kind of odd. Carson, sometimes he didn't always text, but that's weird he didn't pick up. So I thought, well, I'll drive down, I want to go see his dog. He has his dog Rudy, and I want to go, see what's going on there. And I drove to the house, and his pickup was there. And I walked to the door, and I heard his dog loudly barking. I went in, and his dog was yelping and very agitated. And I called for Carson, and there was no response. And I walked into his living room, and there he was on his living room floor, cold, gray, and hard. And I called 911, and that is a difficult call to make. I knew at that point that Carson was gone and that I couldn't save him. When the police came, there were quite many. I think there were about 10. They asked me a lot of questions, and then the detectives showed up, and then they had the paramedics came in, and I will never forget the paramedics looking at my son and saying, "Yeah, he's gone." There was no attempt to revive him. We knew he was gone. And when the detectives came, they asked me, "Did you give him mouth to mouth?" And I said, "No, I knew he was gone." They asked, "Did I go in his pockets?" And at that time, it really bothered me. And I believe because I believe they reiterated that question 2 or 3 times. Did you go in his pockets? And I said, "Did you think I was trying to rob my son?" I had no idea, none whatsoever, what they were getting at. Anyway, it was a long process, and I couldn't watch as they carried my son away in a body bag. And we had to wait 12 weeks for a toxicology report to come back. And when the medical examiner's office called, they told me it was fentanyl. I could not believe what I had heard. I had no idea what it was. You know, someone had brought up, I wonder if he took something and it had fentanyl in it. So we know that Carson had taken Xanax and had been legally prescribed it at Gonzaga, which I have issues with because I think, Sheriff, our first line of defense in many ways in dealing with things is to give us a pill. When I lost my husband, that was their first response was, do you want to go on an antidepressant? When I lost Carson, that was the first response. Do you want to go on an antidepressant? I think that that it's too easy for our children to get their hands on things. I think that they're prescribed things when they receive an injury, when their wisdom teeth are taken out. Can we take a pause?
You can.
Okay, can we take a pause, guys? Absolutely. Okay, I've lost my train of thought. Where would you like me to go next?
Why don't we talk a little bit about I think you're on a good path. Let me help you take it to the next level. You're talking about we get prescribed pills all the time, and at that point, it becomes kind of a cultural aspect of if anything goes wrong, take a pill for it, and that can lead to people taking pills that not necessarily are needed. We need to learn to different coping methods.
And I think that I want to speak to, then Carson was diagnosed with cancer and, was prescribed it again and went counseling. And because of COVID, it was a perfect storm. So in January of 2020, Carson was diagnosed with appendix cancer, and his surgeon failed to tell him for 2 months that his appendix was cancerous. So that heightened anxiety within Carson, and rightly so. Watching a healthy man and his father succumb to it, to cancer, was overwhelming for Carson. So after tests and many scans done, it was determined the cancer hadn't spread, but Carson had to be monitored because there was a spot on his lung. So Carson went to counseling. He was prescribed Xanax again. He went to counseling and found it to be a difficult thing because now the pandemic started. It was impersonal, and he stopped going. So it was a difficult thing for him.
You mentioned when the detectives were there. And if we could bring up the next slide, I think that this really speaks to the why the detectives asked you the questions they asked you. And you've talked with the DA about this situation. Can you speak a little bit about this clip right here?
Sure, I'll read it. I wrote it. I was speaking with an agent, and the DEA said fentanyl can be found in every 2 or 3 pills out of every 5 being illegally manufactured and sold. Fentanyl, the size of 2 sugar grains, will kill. I was told that if I had given my son mouth-to-mouth resuscitation or gotten residue from the pill on my hands, I too could have succumbed to fentanyl's poisoning. I was recently told that we will never see an end to the increase in fentanyl-laced pills and its deadly effects in our lifetime. And to me, Sheriff, that's chilling.
It is. And I don't think a lot of people realize that merely touching something that's been laced with fentanyl can kill you. Law enforcement officers, we're teaching our people that if it's a suspected drug, regardless of what it is, you glove up because you don't know. And there have been too many cases where simply touching a drug, a law enforcement officer touching a drug that's been seized, that they have had to be revived and saved with Narcan. And this whole notion of this is to the point where we're never going to see an end of it, we have to work towards finding that end. And it is so easy for these kids, for anybody, an adult, kid, whatever, to get a hold of this stuff. And you mentioned to me that Carson obtained this, a guy from Snapchat. And let's bring up that slide that's next, because Snapchat, I don't think a lot of parents realize, has become one of the biggest drug markets in our kids' lives. And not only drug markets, they're selling guns, they're selling vape pens, or they're selling all kinds of things on Snapchat.
Trafficking.
They're trafficking people on Snapchat. They are actually, rival gangs are sending messages back and forth. We're going to take somebody out. And you've had an interesting conversation with Snapchat concerning this. What was their response when you contacted them?
Sure. If I can back up a little
Yes.
bit. So when Carson passed away, it was so, it was like we were in a fog because it didn't make sense to us. We had his phone and we didn't have a password to it, which I think that needs to be changed. And I will speak to that shortly. We held on to his phone, and after a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, Carson started receiving Snapchats from an individual, and they were pictures of drugs. This continued on for 5 months, and we supplied that information to both the detectives and the DEA. The individual, a sting was done. The individual served 24 hours in jail for my son's death. And as I've said, well, I'm sentenced to a life of hell. I wrote to Snapchat because one of the things, Sheriff, that I found, I have two choices. I can wallow in sorrow, or I can make a change. And I vowed I'm going to make a change. I will not, and I cannot sit back and watch another family be brought to their knees in sorrow like we have. I look at my students and I think, which one of you in 5, 6 years will succumb to this drug? So I did write to Snapchat, and their response was very methodical and well thought out. It was what I like to call kind of a pat response. A lot of platitudes, we're so sorry for your loss. And they, I'm deeply sorry for your loss. Please accept our most sincere condolences to you and your family. We are sadly aware of the soaring rates of drug deaths that have ravaged our country, particularly impacting our youth. We've spent the last year working with safety partners, parents and drug experts, and law enforcement organizations to understand how SNAP can help combat this growing crisis. Well, to that I would say, then why for 5 months did this individual continue to Snapchat drugs, not only to my son, but other people? My son was not friends with this individual. Had he been friends with him, this individual would have known that my son was deceased. So they went on to list all of the things that they have put in place. And I said, how many families will you have to write this to? How many more families? Then someone else came involved, and she said, I I sent the pictures that the DEA had given us to Snapchat concerning my son's death. And we had, not only did we have the Snapchat records, we also had the Cash App payment. And what we were told, I'm kind of going off script here a little bit, I guess, Sheriff, is that cases such as Carson's are not, we cannot try those because our laws favor the dealers.
And you're absolutely right.
When
we call these reforms, and we call them, we wrap these up in nice little platitudes and words, but what we have done is made it open season on the citizen, and we have given total anonymity and the ability to continue to victimize people, to the people that are committing crimes. You will never hear me say anything different. You are absolutely right.
We had the evidence. We had the evidence, but that's what we were told, that our country favors the drug dealers. So in Washington State, an individual can walk around with an ounce of meth or an ounce of coke or an ounce of whatever and not be put in jail for that. But if you have an open container, if you've gone to a friend's house, you just mowed your yard or whatever, and you happen to have that beer in your hand, you can get in more trouble for that than you can, is my understanding.
You're right.
And to me, that just, it doesn't make sense.
And nor does it. And, we talked about that, and you talked about, how do we overcome this? And the simplest answer to that is electing people to office has consequences. We need to be careful who we're electing to office. And the people that we've elected to office have decided to follow a philosophy that is criminal-centric, but not in the way that most people our age would think of criminal-centric, as in, holding them accountable for what they've done, trying to find a way to stop their behavior and bring them back into society. And they've adopted a totally different philosophy of criminal-centric means justice for the criminal, not for the victim. And everything is centered on that criminal. So the way we fix this is we have to make sure that the people we're sending to represent us are crafting laws that care about the victims, that care about you, the mothers of the kids that are dying.
So, Sheriff, I would say there is, I'd like to just add to that. There was a segment on NBC News where a father in California, his name is Jaime Porta, his 16-year-old son was killed by fentanyl. And he said that our children did not overdose. Our children were murdered. There is a gentleman out of Cleveland, Ohio, for 6 years. His son passed away in 2015, and I apologize, I can't remember his name. He has been trying to get fentanyl listed as a weapon of mass destruction. There have been so many pills that have been confiscated within the United States that can kill us many times over. And our PSAs, the public service announcements that I've heard concerning opioid use, it only speaks to opioid use. It doesn't speak to fentanyl. And we need to be screaming this from the top of our lungs. This is a one and done. Your child will be gone. Even if Carson had had someone there with him, even if there had been the Narcan there was too much that was in that pill. And what the state attorney for Eastern Washington at the time, Mr. Harrington, told me was how these pills are made. They're made very quickly. They're made to look like the drug. So to an untrained eye, it appears to be what they're getting, what they think that they're purchasing is a Xanax or a...
Because Carson thought he was purchasing Xanax.
Thought he was purchasing because he didn't have his prescription.
He was actually purchasing fentanyl, and that fentanyl ended up costing him his life.
Correct.
And the U.S. Attorney, former U.S. Attorney for Eastern Side, Mr. Harrington, is 100% correct. That is how they're crafted. And one of the things that I think that is really appalling is that it's hard to get Snapchat to change their way, because they told you basically, well, we rely on the community to turn these people in.
Who's going to turn in their drug dealer?
Exactly. And they know what's going on. They're making billions of dollars off of their product, and they know that this is going on, but they refuse to change their philosophies. At times they're very difficult to work with as far as law enforcement trying to work with them to solve these type of crimes. And you're here because you talked with Senator Murray's representative here locally.
I did.
Mr. Colton. And John got a hold of me and he said, Ozzy, I remember about 7 years ago when we were standing in a press conference talking about the effects of the opioid pandemic that's affecting us at that time. And you said, and he said, I'll never forget it. You said, John, if you think this is bad, wait till fentanyl gets here. Because that was the early dawning years of fentanyl. And it's here. And fentanyl is going to overshadow the opioid issue. Fentanyl is going to overshadow it in major ways. Over 100,000 people a year are dying from fentanyl. You stated it very succinctly and correctly. There are so many pills being flooded into this country that it can kill this country multiple times over.
Correct.
And we still aren't taking the actions needed to hold those accountable for bringing that into our country, for where we refuse to take the measures that it's going to take to stop the flow of those drugs into our country. If we go to the next slide, because I really, just for our audience, you sent me a lot of material to look at before we did the podcast, and I took snippets of the things I really thought really touched the heart of this, and really touched the heart of what you want to convey to people. And this is the last slide, and this is something that I put in there simply because I have heard this from so many parents. I've talked to so many parents about this issue, so many parents that have lost kids. I've talked to parents ranging from, trying to reach out and do something, to parents that are very, very angry because the system failed them. And the system did fail them. The system didn't protect their children. The system didn't protect their kids from these drug dealers, and quite frankly, at times from themselves. One father was like, Sheriff, if they would have just arrested my daughter, put her in jail, got her some help, she may still be alive. But we don't do that. We're not holding people accountable for their actions, either at the criminal level or people that are associated with the drug level. Carson's case is totally different. He bought what he thought was a prescription drug online one time, and it cost him his life. There are so many people I talk to that my kid went to a party, they've never taken anything like that, and it killed them one time. And you made it very clear, parents, please reach out to your kids.
So I am an educator, and friends have asked me. I don't do social media because I feel that if I want you to know about my life, I'll tell you in person. I don't feel the need to share things online. So I'm a very private person, I guess you could say. But my friends have asked, please write something so we can post it. And I did write something. And I said, I'll just kind of read a few things. I need for families to know that this is not something that only happens to addicts. Teenage children and young adults have become some of the most frequent victims of this illicit and insidious drug. The adage, stay away from drugs, no longer carries the imminent warning it should. We need to be shouting, this is a one and done. We need to be educating our children and families alike to fentanyl's prevalence and deadly effects. It has flooded our community. We are no longer living in a society where drug sales are back alley dealings. Because of social media, our loved ones can be purchasing a drug from within the safety of their own home. In Carson's case, it was Snapchat. This app is favored by individuals selling drugs because once the chat is open, the evidence is gone. Parents, please speak to your children about fentanyl, educate yourselves and educate them. Don't just assume because you have a good child, they will never do something like this. One time is all it takes. I never thought it would happen to my family. I never did.
Molly, I really appreciate you coming in to talk today and to tell us a little bit about Carson's story and about what you faced. Sadly, you're one of hundreds of thousands of parents that are dealing with this. And until our elected leaders at the local, state, and national level actually take time to fix this, to actually go, we are no longer going to tolerate our kids dying at the hands of drug dealers, and hold these social media companies accountable for the deaths of our children. It's going to be a very long road for us. And ladies and gentlemen, I want you to think about something. Molly stated it, how normalized this has become to simply go online, buy a drug. I've kind of focused on our electeds, and I'm going to focus on us now. The people of Spokane County, the people of the state of Washington, the people of America. Because quite frankly, we're doing this to ourselves. In the state of Washington and many other states, we voted to legalize marijuana. What was the message sent to our children? We now have marijuana being sold illicitly to kids in the 6th grade. And when you talk to these kids and you try to explain to them the damaging effects that drug has on their young minds, they're going, how can this be? You legalized it. It's legal. It must be safe. We did this to ourselves. There are consequences for the things that we are doing. We are being fed a line of misinformation by activists that were responsible for I-9 or for I-504 or I-501 being passed, legalizing the marijuana. They told us all these things that, the cartels will disappear, the cartels will go away, illegal marijuana will go away. Well, if you've been paying attention to the media, all you see is state after state after state complaining that they're losing revenue to the cartels and to illegal marijuana outlets. They're upset because they're losing tax dollars, but they don't care about the lives they're losing in their children. It was all a lie. We all knew that you legalize this, none of this goes away because I can grow marijuana, I can sell it to your kids cheaper than you can go down to the marijuana shop and buy it. Think about what we're doing to our children. Think about what we're doing to our society. Drug addiction is nothing new to America. In the early 1900s and late 1800s, we knew we had a problem. About 50% of America was addicted. There were reasons we passed laws we passed at those times. Now we're repeating history. But this time, our children are dying because of it. Just something to think about, folks. All things have consequences. This is Sheriff Ozzie Kneovich. Have a good day.